Welcome to this live TV5 News special report. Question 1, same-sex marriage in Maine. Now here's your moderator, Carolyn Callahan.
Thanks for joining us tonight for the TV5 Forum on Same-Sex Marriage. It's part of our Campaign 2012 coverage. In 2009, the state legislature passed gay marriage. Governor John Baldacci signed the law in May of that year, but opponents got enough signatures to put it to a vote. Maine voters rejected gay marriage. Now the discussion continues. Question 1 on next month's ballot will state, do you want to allow the state of Maine to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples? Both sides of the issue are represented here tonight. Joining us from the Christian Civic League of Maine is Carol Conley. From Mainers United for Marriage, Matthew McTighe is joining us tonight. We're going to be taking your phone calls, your tweets, and your Facebook messages throughout this program. Our phone number is 947-9380. Give us a call. You can tweet us questions using hashtag TV5Forum, or you can post a question on our Facebook page. Now, we do understand that this is an emotional issue. We do ask everyone be respectful. We want this to be a civil and informative discussion about same-sex marriage. We're going to get started now. Each person will have 90 seconds to answer a question. There will be time for rebuttal if it is felt necessary. We will alternate who answers each question first. We're going to start with Matt. And Matt, my first question is for the two of you, and I want to know, if same-sex marriage passes here in Maine, what does that mean for Mainers in your view?
It means two things. What this citizens initiative, and it is a citizens initiative, this was brought by the people of Maine. More than 105,000 people from 450 towns signed this initiative to bring it to the ballot this November. And what it will do is two things. It will allow, as the question wording that you just read implies, it will allow marriage licenses for same-sex couples, that actual civil marriage license that every couple, when they choose to get married, that function of the state when you go into your town clerk's office to get the marriage license. So it will allow same-sex couples to obtain a marriage license, but it will also add new protections to Maine law to strengthen religious freedom by ensuring that no church or clergy would ever be allowed or forced to go against their religious beliefs.
All right, Carol.
We believe that, as Matt said, it will allow same-sex couples to get licenses. We believe there will be much greater consequences than that. When you look at states where this has already occurred, like Massachusetts and Vermont and the District of Columbia, there have been significant negative consequences, one of which is religious liberties. That's why we fought so hard to make sure that on this ballot question, the red herring of religious liberty wasn't on there. We don't believe that those are anything other than it's already covered by the First Amendment, and it gives people the wrong impression that there are religious liberties that are only in consideration of pastors or priests that are involved in those wedding ceremonies. We are really concerned about teachers or other people that might speak out against this, as we've seen. So we believe there are really significant consequences for religious liberties. And then we also believe that the ideal situation to raise children is a home with a mom and a dad. And so therefore we believe there are negative consequences for children as well.
All right, we do have a phone call, and I know that you probably have some things you want to say to that, but I want to get to the questions first. We have Debbie from Winterport. And Debbie, what's your question?
I'd like to know, how many times do people of Maine this issue down, or the position realizes we have this law? Every year we go to the polls, every year we vote no, and the next year it's right back on the ballot again.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. That a little broken up, but could you make out what you're saying?
Sure. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what she means that every year this comes up. This is actually only the second time that Maine voters have ever dealt with the issue of same-sex marriage. The first time and the last time was 2009 when this issue was brought up. You mentioned that Governor Baldacci and the state legislature passed marriage, and then it was opponents of marriage that actually brought it to the ballot in the form of a challenge. This time around, as I mentioned in my opening statement, this is actually a citizens initiative that was brought by the people of Maine, the voters of Maine, to bring it back to the ballot to allow all loving, committed couples in Maine the freedom to marry.
Matt's right. This was brought forth by the legislature, and oftentimes people ask the question, you know, is this inevitable because it's happened in 6 other states? And it always has happened either by legislators that were not representing the will of the people or by activist judges. And in Maine, this is the first time that the proponents of folks that want to redefine marriage have brought it as an initiative. And so we do believe that after 3 years, when people said, no to this by a margin of 6%, which is pretty similar to what Obama won in 2010, significant. It's unfortunate that we're facing this again. And we say to the people of Maine that right now that if you want to put an end to this, then we need to defeat this soundly so that we discourage an attempt to redefine marriage again.
All right, let's get to another phone call. We have Donald from Winterport. Donald, what's your question?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Donald, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, what's your question?
I don't have a question. I was just calling to vote.
Oh, well, we're taking questions right now, but you can vote on November 6th at the polls, so we'll take our next call right now. And I believe this is Donald from Winterport. Donald?
Yes. Okay. My question is for the panel that there is some lawsuit pending. I heard on NPR News that there's going to be multiple marriages lawsuit lining up. I would like to see what the commentary is. That's 3 or 4 people of either sex or one sex or mixed sex. But I'd like to hear the commentary of the panel on that, please. It's in Utah, I believe. It was on NPR.
Okay.
Lawsuits lining up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly not heard anything at all about any lawsuits pending that involve, I forget exactly what he said there, multiple relationships or anything like that. I mean, but whatever, I certainly have not heard anything like that, and we're certainly not involved or advocating for that here. What we're talking about here is the freedom to marry in Maine. There are already thousands of loving, committed couples that are living in Maine right now. These people are our family members, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, and all we're asking for is to allow the state of Maine to issue a marriage license to those couples. That's what voters are going to be going to the polls to vote on this November 6th, and we're asking them to vote yes so that all of their friends and neighbors and family members can have that same freedom to marry.
I understand that there are attempts to do that, and right now the administration is not either defending or going after that. And I think it's an important question because for thousands of years the definition of marriage has been the union of one man and one woman. We believe that's timeless. We believe it's unique, we believe it's special, we believe it's universal. And so it's been the building block of civilization. And there have been times when folks have tried to redefine marriage by attempts of polygamy and other things like this. And the United States government has stepped in and said, no. This is not in women's best interest. This is not in children's best interest. Not because we hated those people that wanted another definition of marriage, but because it really is the ideal in which a government wants to invest in the process to make sure this next generation of citizens have the best opportunity to be healthy and happy. So I think it is an important interest. It's not arbitrary. We believe this is something that has been around for a long time, that is time-tested, and it's the best way to ensure that families have the opportunity to prosper.
Matt, did you want to say something?
Carol has mentioned twice now this next generation, talking about protecting the next generation. What all of the research shows on this is that children do best when raised in a loving, stable home. Now, I know Carol and his, the people funding his campaign have tried to advocate that this is somehow going to harm children. That is absolutely not the case, and that's why the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, and 30 years, more than 30 years of real social science research makes it very clear that children do best when raised in a loving, stable home. Now, there are already plenty of children, loving, committed couples that are raising kids here in Maine. This would allow them to obtain all of the protections of marriage. It would make those children safer and more secure, and it would certainly make those families more secure. That's something we should actually be encouraging.
May I answer that?
Sure.
Again, when we were in Scarborough, we were involved in a forum down there, and Matt was asked, is there evidence that shows that this is either positive or against children? And the fact is, right now, this is such a new thing. Matt said rightly that this is such a nuance that there really is not enough evidence to determine whether this is positive or negative. But we say that history does tell us that the absolutely ideal environment is for children to be raised with both a mom and a dad. Now, those that want to redefine marriage say that, moms and dads don't both matter. We believe that they do matter, and it does make a difference.
But Carol, all of the research shows, the real research, and I know that you guys have tried to push out a study that was actually funded by a conservative think tank that's one of your largest donors, but the actual research on this, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, the National Association of Social Workers, 30 years of research shows that children do best when they're raised in a loving, stable home. If they have two parents, it doesn't matter that, whether it's two moms or two dads. If they're raised in a loving, stable home, that makes all families stronger. Now, there are already children that are being brought up in homes with same-sex parents. I'm not sure how you can advocate or say that those children's lives are not made more difficult by not allowing their parents to have the freedom to marry.
May I answer that?
Very quickly, then
Okay.
we're going to move on.
Again, for thousands of years, this is the time-proven, time-tested way of showing that this is the best opportunity. And he talks about for 30 years. This is something that's only been around, legalized for the first time in 2004. So we believe this is risky. We don't believe that it is time-tested, and that is why we're telling people that moms and dads both do matter. They're saying they don't. We believe they both do matter.
Okay, we're going to move on to some social media questions now. We do have a question, I am told, from Facebook, I believe, and that question is, how would gay marriage redefine marriage? And that's from Renee Reynolds in Bangor.
Well, it would actually allow all loving, committed couples in Maine to join in this stabilizing institution of marriage. I mean, we believe very firmly that marriage really is the strongest bond that society can confer on a couple to say that they are, in fact, committed in the eyes of the law, that they are willing to make that lifetime commitment to one another. And that's something that we're actually trying to encourage. We're trying to join and respect that institution because that is a stabilizing bond that makes all families stronger. When you reaffirm that marriage is about love and commitment and being able to stand in front of your friends and family and make a lifelong commitment, that's something we think should be encouraged.
Marriage really predates government. So government doesn't create marriage, it recognizes it. And that's a historical fact. So what is the role of government? Why are citizens even being asked in any way or, to weigh in on this? And again, it comes back to that the government doesn't care about loving and committed couples. That's not why they create tax benefits or other things that the government may choose to do to make it easier and to promote families. So we are saying that it is a redefinition. We've had these things brought before us before, as we said, when the Supreme Court said that polygamy would not be allowed. Not anybody can just get married. Right now, the government restricts the fact that I can't marry somebody else that's already married unless they get divorced. I can't marry someone that's a minor. I can't marry someone that's a close blood relative. So the government does say, here is the reason why we believe that we want to create marriage for, again, the benefit of society as a whole and specifically children.
But we are talking about civil marriage here. The actual act, I mean, this is something every couple has to do. You have to go down to the town clerk's office and get your marriage license. That's all we're talking about here. That's all question one would do, is allow all loving, committed couples to do that, to actually obtain a state marriage license, a civil marriage license from their town clerk, from the state. So we are talking about government here. As much as Carol wants to pretend that that's not the issue, we're talking about civil marriage.
And I agree that it is government, but because we have invented terms like civil marriage or religious marriage, marriage is marriage.
No, we're talking about marriage.
And we are talking about
marriage licenses is something that all couples have to do. You have to go get a marriage license. That's all that this initiative would allow. It would allow all loving, committed couples to obtain a marriage license and would add protections to Maine law to strengthen religious freedom.
All right, we're going to go to the phones because we have people who have been waiting a while. We have Larry in Skowhegan. Larry, what's your question, Larry?
My question is more about lingo and social aspects. Like, if I'm around mixed company and the topic comes up, how would I word it without, like, sounding discriminatory or prejudiced in any way if I agree with traditional marriage?
I think that it's interesting that this question is being framed as the only way that you can prove that you're not a bigot or a hater is by redefining marriage. And I think that's unfair. I think that there are people that honestly disagree, that see that there are consequences. When we look at what has happened in every state and frankly every country like Canada, Denmark, England, where there have been very serious consequences, infringement upon people's rights, that you should be able to stand up civilly and talk about this without being called a bigot or being called a hater.
Now, we are obviously, I mean, this entire campaign has been based on the idea of going out and having very civil conversations, one-on-one, personal conversations. This is a citizens initiative. It's a grassroots campaign, and we have had more than 210,000 one-on-one conversations with Mainers about why marriage matters to all families. They've been extremely civil in nature. We've taken time to talk to them, but also to listen to them and meet them where they are on this issue. It's an ongoing process. We know that some people are struggling with this. We want to respect that and give people time to come to this, to whatever conclusions they come to on their own. But what we have found as we've gone door to door and had so many of these conversations is that more and more people are changing their hearts and minds every day. They're coming to see that all loving, committed couples should have the freedom to marry, and it's not going to hurt their marriage or certainly hurt the next generation. And as far as the consequences that Carol keeps talking about, he keeps bringing up examples. They've talked about this in their television ads. Those have nothing to do with marriage law. They have everything to do with existing Maine law pertaining to non-discrimination. Laws that were passed many, many years ago, not having to do with this pending ballot initiative that's coming up right now.
Of course, we would strongly disagree with that. And no matter how many times Matt says all that's going to happen is people are going to be allowed to have marriage license, he has his head in the sand. That's not true. And when you look at the fact that the couples in Massachusetts that were told that they couldn't take their children out of classrooms, their tolerance classes that were talking about marriage equality, the Supreme Court said to those families, no, you cannot take those children out of there. When we talk about Boston and Washington, D.C. and Illinois, where either adoption agencies or where other agencies were shut down for foster care because of the changes in the law and the conflicts that that resulted in, those, especially when we talk about Catholic charities, they took on the most difficult adoptions, and now they're out of business because of the redefinition of marriage.
And I'm sure Matt wants to jump in on that, okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is something that needs to be corrected because it is simply not true. The chairman of Catholic Charities has come out and asked Carol's group to stop making this argument because it is not true in any way. That Catholic Charities was placing children in same-sex homes for 17 years. 17 years until 2006. 2 years after marriage was legalized in Massachusetts, the Diocese of Massachusetts found out that they were placing at-risk children that were some of the most difficult to place, as Carol mentioned, in homes, loving, stable homes with same-sex parents. The Catholic Diocese put a stop to that and said that they had to stop doing that. The chairman of Catholic Charities at the time, Peter Mead, has come out, he's written an op-ed, he's talked to reporters about this, and he has made it clear to Carol's group and to others that they need to stop saying that that was based on marriage. It was 2 years later, and it was because the non-discrimination laws in Massachusetts said that they had, because that Catholic Charities accepted public funds, they had to follow the same laws as other groups that accepted public funds as a state agency. It had nothing to do with the marriage law that was passed 2 years earlier.
Very quick, 15 seconds.
Google why Catholic Charities closed Washington, D.C. and Boston, and they will tell you if same-sex marriage had not been carried in those states, those agencies would still be open. You draw your own conclusions.
Okay, Facebook question now that we have from a viewer. If someone fundamentally disagrees with same-sex marriage for any reason, why should they be forced to recognize a same-sex marriage? That is from Lou from Facebook.
Well, I mean, if somebody disagrees with a law, should they be forced to recognize the law? They don't have to personally condone it or say that they support it themselves, but everyone has to follow the law. We're talking again about civil marriage here, the actual act of going to obtain a marriage license. So if somebody is, if it's a business or an individual, we all, as Mainers, have to follow existing laws. I don't think anybody's advocating for people to be able to just follow their own laws or make decisions about which laws they want to respect and which ones they don't.
And I think this is one of the issues where we talk about the deep religious convictions of individuals. I think it's easy for someone to say, well, you just follow the law when that conflict doesn't exist. But when the conflict exists, and the example that we give is the couple in Vermont that owned an inn, and they discussed and told people that they had a reluctance about hosting gay marriages at their inn. They were fined $30,000 for not doing that. And oftentimes, Matt will talk about the strengthening of religious liberties or religious freedoms, and he's only talking about 1,100 or 1,200 people in the state. He's just talking about pastors and priests. He's not talking about printers. He's not talking about caterers. He's not talking about photographers or anybody else. Notary republics. They all will be forced to recognize something that goes against their deeply held religious beliefs, against our First Amendment.
Now, I mean, Carol, so we're talking about very different things here. Again, you're talking about existing Maine settled law. This is a law that was actually passed by voters in 2005 here in Maine. That's existing non-discrimination law. If you're a business, if you open a business, you have to follow the law. You're open for business, you're open for everyone. That is what our law states. Now, you can't disagree with someone, you can't refuse them services because of the color of their skin or because you're a Catholic and they're a Protestant. You mentioned notaries. I'm glad you respect notaries. I myself am a notary. So, you know, this is something that when I chose to become an agent of the state, to become a notary public and serve as an agent of the state, I recognized that I had to perform and carry out Maine law. Now, I'm a firefighter down in York, Maine, where I live. Some of the firefighters have come to me and asked me to notarize their marriages, essentially perform the wedding, you know, their marriages for them, to license their marriage. Now, I couldn't say turn one of them down because one of them's a Protestant and I'm a Catholic. I couldn't say that, no, I'm not going to perform your marriage. I'm not going to execute the duties of the state as a notary public. I have to follow Maine law. That's existing settled law here in Maine, and it's not going to be changed if voters vote yes on one this November.
All right, we're going to get to a phone call now. We're going to take Melissa from Rockland. And Melissa, you have a question about a Maine Watch segment?
Yes, I saw you two gentlemen on Maine Watch last week, and I was interested to hear again from Matthew when he's talking about the non-discrimination laws. What is lacking now if it is legal to not marry anyone? And I'm talking about at the getting your license, just plain getting your license. And how does that relate to our non-discrimination laws now?
Not sure I totally understand the question, but I think, you know, what she was asking is essentially how same-sex couples are treated now under existing law. Obviously, same-sex marriage is not legal at the moment. We hope that voters will vote yes and allow it to pass this November. But, you know, a business at the moment, you know, if there's a caterer or, you know, some of the examples that Carol mentioned, he talked about florists and caterers or B&B owners, they couldn't, you know, refuse me service for an anniversary party if I wanted to have an anniversary party with my same-sex spouse, or if there was if I was going to have a civil partnership ceremony or something else. They couldn't refuse me service now because they have to follow existing non-discrimination law. This was a law that was passed by Maine voters in 2005.
And again, as we said, when he became a notary or anybody else, that conflict did not exist. We are creating a conflict that does not exist. And therefore, we have said that we will accommodate people based upon their religious convictions. The First Amendment is an incredibly important part of our document. And I think it's important to recognize that there are fatal flaws in this law. When he talks even about the religious liberty of churches and priests, because they talk about recognition and they don't define what a host is. And if we have people looking at this, that there are gaping holes of legal ambiguities, even with the church, even with those type of things. He just mentioned an anniversary party. They don't make the distinction between a wedding and a marriage. They're saying, well, you just don't have to perform the wedding ceremony. But again, what about a church in regard to an anniversary? What about if there is a marriage seminar and that church does not want to recognize those things? And so there are many aspects of this where they focus basically on the wedding ceremony, and we say there's much more to a marriage than just a wedding.
Well, Carol, you yourself have ceded this point numerous times already in the debate and certainly in the past in your public statements. The First Amendment and this law adds additional protections that would cover clergy, or churches and clergy, and make sure that no church or clergy is ever forced to perform any wedding or go against their conscience or go against their religious beliefs. You ceded that point and you sort of dismissed it and said that only affects, you know, 1,100 or 1,000 clergy, right, and then tried to talk about businesses instead and non-discrimination law. But churches, this law, if voters vote yes on one this November, they will be actually adding additional new changes to Maine law that exempt churches and make sure that there's no ambiguity about it, that no church or clergy will be forced to go against their religious beliefs or perform any wedding that violates their religious beliefs.
Again, the narrow focus is on the ceremony and not marriage and what the implications are far beyond after that ceremony is gone. And we do not agree that they're adding anything that this is already covered under the First Amendment.
All right, we have a Facebook question to get to before we take our first break, and the question is, what effects will same-sex marriage have on the Maine economy, if any? And that's from Spencer on Facebook.
the studies on this in California when Proposition 8 was being argued and the Supreme Court struck down the sovereign will of the people of California was that there would be incredible boondoggle financially, and that simply hasn't been the case. There have been many studies. They thought that a lot of couples would be coming in and that there would be some type of financial boondoggle or advantage to this. As far as the negative implications, again, I agree with what Matt said back when we were in Scarborough. This is such a new thing. We really don't know what the consequences are going to be.
I'm not sure what study or anything Carol's talking about. I mean, same-sex marriage isn't legal in California, so I'm not sure why he would bring up an example from a state where marriage actually hasn't been legalized.
It was legal actually.
For a few months, right. But certainly not enough time for any business implications to take effect. In the states that actually have passed marriage and where it's held for years, Massachusetts was the first state, for example, to legalize marriage in 2004, and they have seen an increase in business, in tourism business, in wedding business, for those, for all those businesses that Carol was just talking about. And the fact that he keeps on talking about this flood of lawsuits. I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier. Maine law, this non-discrimination law that we've had in place here in Maine in 2005, there's no reason, there's a reason that Carol keeps on citing examples from other states. We haven't had any challenges to that existing Maine law here in Maine. The people of Maine are very respectful to one another, and they just use common sense. To use that notary public example we talked about earlier, if I disagree with somebody, if I really wouldn't feel comfortable because something about their marriage doesn't sit well with me, either one or both had been divorced previously or something about it, if I as a Catholic had some discomfort or misgivings, I would express those misgivings to them. I would still have to ultimately perform the marriage or carry out the duties of the state as a notary because I chose to take on that when I became a notary. But if I expressed that to them and said, I really wouldn't, I prefer not to, I have to ultimately, but I prefer not to, there are 24,000 notaries in the state of Maine. I'm sure that they would probably be more comfortable just going and finding one that would be more comfortable. That's just common sense, and I just have more faith in the voters of Maine. We haven't seen any increase or any lawsuits filed in the 7 years that we've had a non-discrimination law in the books here in Maine. So I'm not sure where Carol thinks this flood of lawsuits is going to come from here in Maine.
Again, we base that upon the countries and the states where this has already occurred. Again, it's very cute for Matt to talk about, well, it hasn't happened in the last 7 years. That conflict does not exist. The minute that we vote in and redefine marriage to include same-sex, you will now have a conflict that doesn't exist and does presently exist in places like Canada and England and Denmark and our states like DC, where people are sued, people are fired, and lawsuits do occur. So again, there's no way that it could happen in Maine because the conflict does not exist until the redefinition of marriage
But you're
occurs.
just talking about adding an additional service. There are already plenty of reasons that if somebody didn't like me because I'm a gay man, if somebody had a problem with me being in a relationship or wanting to have a commitment ceremony or an anniversary party or a birthday party or anything else, you're just talking about adding one service to the many things that I could go request service for. If you open a business, you have to follow Maine law. You open a business, you're in the business of making money, not judgments. And I think that actually in this economy, most people would probably rather have the extra business right now in this state.
I consider marriage more than just another benefit or another service, Matt. And I think that's the issue.
Carol, you're talking about the service, the actual act of the wedding.
We need to take a break, but we will come back and continue this conversation and keep your phone calls coming and your tweets and your Facebook messages. We'll be right back.